Order. Order. Jan Lake. Oh, sorry. Denise Roach, I apologise.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So under the national government, we have a tale of two sectors. On one hand, there's one sector which is the government's sweethearts. There are companies like Serco, like Warner Brothers, like Sky City, and individuals like the Saudi businessman, Mr Al Kharaf. And of course, they are given the sweetheart deal, they're given the sweetheart five-star treatment. And on the other hand, sir, we have the public services and the people who provide those services. People who work for the Department of Conservation. About 1,500 of those people are taking industrial action this week, minimal industrial action. They're working to rule simply for a pay increase. And what have they been offered? 0.4%. These are the people who are charged with protecting our precious flora and fauna, who fight for our endangered species and who are working harder than ever before because of constant redundancies, restructuring and funding cuts. And actually, they're becoming an endangered species themselves almost. And what happens when we underfund our Department of Conservation? Well, we risk our clean, green, 100% pure reputation. The destruction of our Northland Conservation Estate is one example that my colleague Kevin Haig touched on yesterday during question time, and he never got a straight answer from the Minister of Conservation about whether they are using multi-pest approach to trying to conserve our wild places. And that's just one example of underfunding. Another area is the use of volunteers, who of course are really cheap, and it's good to have communities involved. But when you have the slaying of 4 endangered takahe because they were mistaken for pukeko during a cull on Motutapu Island, you have to question whether it actually made financial sense. So the people who work for the public service do it because they care about the country and they care about the people of New Zealand. But that commitment is hardly recognised, and certainly not for the DOC staff. Tomorrow, 1,000 Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment staff will also be taking industrial action. They'll be going on strike. These are the people who deal with immigration, with passport control. They're the people who give advice to businesses who ring up asking for advice on minimum employment standards. They're the labour inspectors who actually enforce minimum labour standards. These are the people who are at the front of our industrial relations advice, and yet these people are having to take industrial action because they are too not getting a pay increase. And it's not just the lousy pay that they're striking about, it's also the culture of mistrust that is so prevalent at MB. And I guess that's not surprising, given that there has been constant restructuring in the super ministry since it was formed only a few years ago. And at the same time that that's been happening, there's been crazy spending on things like TV screens and signs and hair straighteners and goodness knows what else. The chronic underinvestment of public resources under National is a false economy, and they've done it simply for a meaningless surplus in the budget. And that underfunding includes $1 billion missing from the health sector. They've underfunded the Labour Inspectorate so that we only have one Labour inspector for nearly 54,000 New Zealanders, which is less than half of what you'd get if you're in Australia. And it means that there's more exploitation of workers, like the group of workers at Masala, who were paid $2 an hour and took years to process by Labour inspectors. You also get bridge collapses and maintenance shortcuts under dock sites because of that underfunding. So the people who work in these places are struggling. There's been a 14% increase in house prices over the last year and a 4% increase in power prices, and wages are not keeping up. Certainly there is a competition for jobs now, which also forces wages down, with 151,000 people currently unemployed. So how would the Greens fix it? We'd fix it by redirecting money from those sweetheart deals to the people who deserve it, and those are the people who provide our public services.
Jonathan Young.